I'm Danny Brown, and you're listening to 1 Minute Podcast Tips, the show that helps you be a better podcaster in just a minute a week. If you want more specific tips just for you and your podcast, check out the Magic Mike membership at 1minutepodcasttips.com/support. And now, this week's episode. I saw an interesting post over on Reddit the other day that was asking whether you can use processing effects during recording or if it should all be left to post-production and after recording. So I thought that would make a great topic for an episode of 1 Minute Podcast Tips. Now, quick disclaimer, this is going to be a slightly longer episode than 1 minute because I do want to go over a few things with you. And two, I'm not an audio engineer, I'm not an audio expert. It's just my own preferences and what I tend to do. And what I've sort of learned over the last few years watching a bunch of videos, etc. regarding editing and post-production, etc. So, to the topic itself. There's pros and cons to doing a lot of processing pre-recording or during recording. The main pro is obviously you've got your voice and everything sounding just like you want it, and you don't have to do a lot of post-processing afterwards, it's mainly editing. However, the main downside to that is if there's anything wrong with the audio, so let's say you've gone a little bit too crazy with the compression or the noise gate or anything like that, it's harder to fix that afterwards than it is to fix raw audio that might have some issues on it. So in this episode, I'm just going to give you some examples of what processing sounds like during recording for both condenser and dynamic mics, and that'll give you an idea as to whether you want to use it or not. Now at the moment, I'm using a condenser mic. It's the TZ Audio Stellar X2 large diaphragm condenser. Really nice mic, I like it a lot. I'm running it through my Rodecaster Pro 2. Now the cool thing with the Rodecaster Pro 2 is it has a bunch of presets for you based on microphone you're using, but it also has a lot of advanced processing that you can do afterwards. So at the moment, I've got zero processing on the condenser. I'm just going to add some basic processing. And this is it with basic processing. What Rode does is it adds some depth, sparkle, and punch to the recording. And this is just some really basic presets. So the depth one, as the name suggests, adds depth to the vocals. Sparkle is for some more brightness and more detail to your voice, so it helps your voice be a bit clearer. And then punch helps the vocal stay consistent across the recording. So as I mentioned, it's really, really basic processing. Now normally when you're adding processing after a recording, there's 3 or 4 main ones that you would use. So there'd be EQ or equalization, and that helps you manage the frequencies. So if you want a deeper tone, a lighter or higher tone, etc., you can adjust the frequencies for lows, mids and highs to get to the kind of vocal that you want to come across. There's de-essing, which as the name suggests, helps remove S's. If your voice is a more sibilant one where it highlights like the hissing sound on an S, then de-essing can help you with that. You've also got compression, and compression reduces the loudest parts while increasing the softest parts of a recording, and that helps make it sound clearer, louder and more natural without any distortion coming through. You can also use a noise gate, so if your recording environment isn't the best and you've got say a fan in the background or AC or outside noise etc, you can use a noise gate. You would then set that noise gate to a level that stops anything above that level coming through in the recording. But if you're too aggressive with a noise gate, it can actually make the recording worse. Because basically what's going to happen is as soon as you stop speaking, all the noise that you're knocking out is now going to come charging back in. And it's really distracting. So these are the main ones that you would normally use. So as I say, I've got basic processing on with the Rodecaster Pro, but what the Rodecaster Pro 2 also has is 3 other presets. So Neutral, Podcast Studio, and Broadcast. Neutral, as the name suggests, adds a little bit more advanced processing, so it will add some de-esser, EQ, compression, etc., but not too much. So if I hit the Neutral button now, and this is me on the Neutral, still on the condenser, I'm not changing anything except going through the presets. So this is what the Rodecaster Pro 2 Neutral processing sounds like when running it through the condenser mic setting. I'm now going to go to the Podcast Studio. And this is the Podcast Studio. You should hear the deeper parts or the lower parts of the recording get a bit more emphasis now. And really with the Podcast Studio, it is adding that bit more processing to it and giving that more polished, slightly deeper sound that you'd expect maybe at a recording studio. The last one is Broadcast and should be a lot more boomier. So let's do that one now. And this is it switched over to Broadcast, and you should be able to hear a lot deeper, a lot more like the old classic radio recording sounds. So that's a Broadcast, and let's just go back to the non-process. So I've taken all the processing off again, and I'm back purely on the microphone. So that's what you can do during recording. Whether you want to do it or not, it's entirely up to yourself. That's on a condenser mic. Let's switch over to a dynamic mic. So I'm now on the dynamic mic, and this is the Shure SM7B, and I'm running it through the SM7B setting on the Rodecaster Pro 2. There's no other processing on it, just the SM7B setting itself. Processing is completely switched off, so this is exactly what the mic would sound like out the box. If I switch the processing on, again, it's adding a little bit of the spark, depth and punch to the vocals that you had on the condenser. You should hear a bit of a difference between condenser and dynamic, because with the condenser, you don't have to put as much gain through it because you're powering it with 48 volts phantom power. With a dynamic mic, you do need more gain, so you do have to push it a bit more. So you may hear a bit of a difference between the two mics when going through the different settings. But again, this is just purely on the SM7B setting with a little bit of depth, sparkle and punch. Now, let's go to the SM7B neutral setting. So this is the neutral setting. So again, this is adding a bit more processing. So a bit of de-essing, a bit of high pass filter, a bit of noise gate and compression and equalizer to the vocals. Not too much because it is still fairly neutral, but it does give you an idea of what the actual effects are. Now, if I go to Podcast Studio, and this is the Podcast Studio on the SM7B setting. So again, you should start to hear the bass and the lower frequencies being pushed more to the fore, and it cleans up the vocals a little bit more around the mid-range, etc. It's trying to highlight the vocals while giving it a bit more polish and a bit more depth to the tone. And finally, let's go to the Broadcast Studio. And this is the Broadcast Studio preset. Once more, you should hear a lot more boominess, a lot more like grand sound, if you like, going for that old classic radio vocals of the 70s and 80s for the Broadcast Studio. A lot more processing on this and a lot more effects from the previous examples. But if I go back to knocking the processing off, and this is it back to the SM7B, purely SM7B out of the box. It is on the SM7B setting on the Rodecaster Pro 2, but I've knocked the processing off. So this is just purely the microphone sound. So that should give you an idea of what the different processing features are and what they bring to the recording. It is entirely up to you whether you add the processing pre-recording and save time editing afterwards, or if you leave everything neutral and then go in afterwards with the post-production editing process and then add your DS, your EQ, your compression, whatever else you want to add to the recording. As I mentioned, there's pros and cons to each. It's really down to you and your recording process and how comfortable you feel recording with processing on versus recording with processing off and having a bit more flexibility afterwards when it comes to repairing the audio. So I hope this has helped and given you a bit of an idea about using processing pre-recording as opposed to in post-production. Until the next time, happy podcasting. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy 1 Minute Podcast Tips, be sure to share with your friends and other podcasters so they can enjoy it too. Until the next time, happy podcasting.